When I pushed open the heavy oak door of that sprawling mansion, the first thing I saw was Haramai Emily down on her knees, scrubbing the marble floors with a rag that looked as worn as her spirit. Her hair, once a cascade of golden waves, was tied back in a limp ponytail, streaked with gray that shouldn't have been there yet. She didn't look up at first. Her shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of the world, the scent of lemon polished thick in the air, masking something deeper, something broken. My heart seized in my chest, a sharp pain like a knife twisting slowly. After 15 long years of searching, of endless nights staring at old photos and whispering prayers into the dark, this is how I found her. In a house that screamed wealth, but with her treated like the help. I stood there frozen, my hand trembling on the doorknob. The distant hum of a vacuum cleaner echoing through the halls like a mocking whisper. I remember the moment I stepped inside more vividly than anything. The foyer was grand, with crystal chandeliers dangling like frozen raindrops, reflecting light off walls lined with expensive art. Paintings of serene landscapes that felt so out of place in this storm of emotions. Emily's hands moved in rhythmic circles, the cloth squeaking faintly against the stone. She wore a simple cotton dress, faded and threadbare at the hems. Nothing like the vibrant clothes she loved as a girl. I wanted to rush to her, to pull her up and hold her, but my feet wouldn't move. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice cracking like old porcelain. She froze, her back stiffening, and when she finally lifted her head, her eyes, those same blue eyes I'd see in my dreams, widened in shock. A mix of recognition and fear flashed across her face, and she glanced over her shoulder as if expecting someone to burst in. "Mom," she breathed, barely audible, dropping the rag into the bucket with a soft splash. In that instant, the years melted away, but so did any illusion of joy. This wasn't a reunion. It was the unraveling of a nightmare I never knew existed. How had it come to this? I'd driven 3 hours that morning, my old sedan rattling over the winding roads to this gated community on the outskirts of the city, following a tip from an old friend who'd seen Emily at a charity event. The mansion loomed like a fortress, its manicured lawn stretching out under a crisp autumn sky, leaves crunching under my tires as I pulled up. I'd imagined so many scenarios over the years, finding her in a small apartment. Maybe struggling but free, or worse, not finding her at all. But this, her in a $4 million home, reduced to this. The air inside was cool, laced with the faint aroma of fresh flowers from a vase on a side table. But it did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. Emily scrambled to her feet, wiping her hands on her dress, her movements jerky, like a bird startled from its nest. "You can't be here," she hissed, her voice low and urgent, glancing again toward the hallway. Footsteps echoed from upstairs, heavy and deliberate, and her face paled. I reached out, my fingers brushing her arm, feeling the warmth of her skin after all this time. "Please, Mom, go," she pleaded, but her eyes told a different story, one of desperation, of secrets buried deep. I didn't budge. Not after 15 years. Not now. That day marked the end of my endless searching, but the beginning of understanding the hell she'd been living in. But to make sense of it, I have to go back to the life we had before she vanished. Before the world tilted on its axis and left me grasping at shadows. My name is Clara, and 15 years ago, life was simple. Wrapped in the quiet rhythms of a small-town existence that felt safe, if not always exciting. We lived in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street in Willow Creek. It's the kind with a wraparound porch where I'd sit with a cup of tea watching the neighbors wave as they passed. The paint was a soft blue, chipped in places from the harsh winters, but it was home. Emily was 19 then, my only child, full of fire and dreams that stretched far beyond our little corner of the world. She'd just finished her first year at community college, studying art, always sketching in her notebook flowers, faces, scenes from our daily life. Her laughter filled the house like sunlight, bright and unfiltered, especially on Sunday mornings when we'd make pancakes together. I'd flip them in the pan, the sizzle of batter hitting hot butter mingling with the smell of fresh coffee brewing. "Mom, you're going to burn them again," she'd tease. Her voice light, nudging me with her elbow as she set the table with our mismatched plates. My husband, Tom had passed 5 years earlier from a sudden heart attack, leaving a void that Emily and I filled with each other. He was the steady one, a mechanic at the local garage. Coming home with grease-stained hands and a smile that could melt away the day's worries. After he was gone, I took a job as a secretary at the elementary school, typing up newsletters and answering phones. The click-clack of the keyboard a constant backdrop to my thoughts. It paid the bills, kept the roof over our heads, and gave me summers off to spend with Emily. We'd take drives to the lake, packing sandwiches in a cooler, the radio playing old country tunes as we sang along off-key. She was my anchor, my reason to keep going. Friends would say, "Clara, you're so strong," but it was Emily who made me that way. Her hugs were fierce, her presence a balm. Our days followed a gentle pattern. Mornings started with the aroma of oatmeal simmering on the stove. Emily, rushing down the stairs in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. "What's for breakfast, Mom?" she'd ask, plopping into her chair with a yawn. We'd talk about her classes, her latest crusher boy named Jake from her art class, or my quirky coworkers. Evenings were for dinner at the kitchen table. Simple meals like roast chicken with potatoes, the steam rising as we shared stories. I'd watch her animated gestures, her hands waving as she described a painting she was working on, the light from the window catching the enthusiasm in her eyes. We had our routines, grocery shopping on Saturdays where she'd push the cart and sneak in extra cookies. Church on Sundays, her voice blending with mine in the hymns. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, warm, predictable, laced with the quiet love that builds over years. Emily had friends, a close-knit group who'd come over for movie nights, popcorn kernels scattering on the living room rug as they laughed at rom-coms. I joined them sometimes, feeling a pang of joy at her happiness. But she was ambitious, talking about transferring to a big university. Maybe even moving to the city for better opportunities. "I want to see the world, Mom," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. I encouraged her, even as a quiet fear tugged at Mitha, fear of her leaving, of the nest emptying. Still, I pushed it down, focusing on the pride swelling in my chest. Life felt full, grounded in those small moments. The creak of the porch swing as we watched fireflies on summer nights. The scent of lavender from the garden I'd planted in Tom's memory. Then, one crisp fall evening, everything shifted. Emily came home later than usual, her cheeks flushed, eyes avoiding mine as she hung up her coat. "Rough day?" I asked, stirring soup on the stove, the savory broth filling the kitchen. She nodded, mumbling something about a group project, but her voice lacked its usual lilt. She picked at her dinner, pushing carrots around her plate, the clink of her fork echoing in the silence. I chalked it up to stress, to the pressures of young adulthood. How could I have known it was the beginning of the end? That night, as I lay in bed, the house settling with its familiar groans, I heard her pacing in her room above. Footsteps soft but insistent. It was the first thread unraveling, but I didn't pull at it, not yet. Looking back, those days seemed like a distant dream, untouched by the storm that was brewing. But storms don't announce themselves. They gather quietly until the sky breaks open. The first real clue came a few weeks later, wrapped in the ordinary guise of a phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun filters through the curtains in lazy beams, dusting the living room with gold. I was folding laundry on the couch, the fresh scent of detergent mingling with the faint mustiness of our old furniture. Emily had been distant lately, coming home late, her phone buzzing constantly with texts she wouldn't let me see. "Just friends, Mom," she'd say with a forced smile, tucking the device into her pocket. I'd nod, but a niggle of worry had started to settle in my gut, like a stone I couldn't dislodge. The phone rang, shrill against the quiet, and I answered, expecting it to be the school with some administrative hiccup. Instead, it was Mrs. Harlan, the art department head at the college. Her voice was crisp, professional, with that underlying warmth educators often have. "Mrs. Thompson, this is about Emily. She's missed 3 classes in a row. Is everything all right?" My hand tightened on the receiver, the cord twisting around my fingers. Missed classes. Emily, who prided herself on perfect attendance. I stammered a response, assuring her it must be a mix-up. But as I hung up, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. I glanced at the clock, 3:45. She should be home soon, when she walked in an hour later. A backpack slung over one shoulder, I was waiting in the kitchen, a cup of tea gone cold in my hands. "Hey, Mom," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes darted away as she grabbed an apple from the bowl. The crunch as she bit into it seemed too loud. "The college called," I said softly, watching her closely. Her chews slowed, a flicker of something guilt crossing her face. "Oh yeah, what about?" She leaned against the counter, trying for nonchalance, but her fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on the granite. I told her about the absences, and she laughed it off, a sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Must be a mistake. I'll sort it out tomorrow." But as she turned to head upstairs, I noticed the way her shoulders tensed, the slight hesitation in her step. That night, sleep evaded me. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood, but my mind raced. I replayed our conversations, searching for cracks. There was the boy she'd mentioned, less and less Jake, and the new friends she talked about vaguely, ones from outside class. I tried to brush it aside, telling myself it was normal for her age. But the doubt lingered like the faint scent of her perfume in the hallway. The next clue came unexpectedly. In the form of a letter I found while cleaning her room, a task I rarely did, respecting her privacy. But that Saturday, with rain pattering against the windows, I ventured in to change the sheets. The envelope was tucked under her mattress, peeking out like a secret begging to be found. It was addressed to her in an elegant script, postmarked from the city. My heart pounded as I opened it, guilt warring with concern. Inside, a note. "Can't wait to see you again. The plans are set. Love, R, who was R." The paper smelled faintly of cologne, masculine and expensive. I sat on her bed, the mattress dipping under me, staring at the words until they blurred. When Emily came home that evening, soaked from the downpour, I confronted her gently over dinner. The steam from the lasagna rose between us, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the chill in the air. "Who's R?" I asked, sliding the letter across the table. Her fork clattered against the plate, her face draining of color. "You went through my things." Her voice was sharp, accusatory, a tone I'd never heard from her. We argued then, our first real fight, the words flying like arrows. "I'm an adult, Mom. You don't get to control me," she shouted, her hands gesturing wildly. I shot back, hurt lacing my words. "I'm worried about you. Emily, this isn't like you." She stormed out, the door slamming with a finality that echoed through the house. In the days that followed, the changes accelerated. She withdrew further, her laughter rare, her presence ghostly. I'd catch her staring out the window, lost in thought, or whispering into her phone late at night. The suspicion grew, a slow burn in my chest. Was it drugs? A bad crowd? Or something more innocent, like love gone wrong? I tried to talk to her friends, but they were evasive, their smiles too tight. "She's fine," Mrs. Thompson once said, but her eyes shifted away. Then, one evening, she didn't come home at all. I waited by the window, the curtains twitching in the breeze, the streetlights casting long shadows. The clock ticked mercilessly, 10 p.m. midnight. 2 a.m. Panic clawed at me as I called her phone. Voicemail after voicemail. By morning, with the first light filtering through, I knew something was terribly wrong. I reported her missing, the police station smelling of stale coffee and desperation. "She's probably just run off with a boyfriend," the officer said dismissively, his pen scratching across the form. But I knew my daughter. This wasn't a whim. It was a disappearance. The weeks blurred into months, the suspicion hardening into grief. I searched everywhere, posters with her photo plastered on lampposts, the ink running in the rain, calls to hospitals, the beep of the line mocking my hope. Life became a haze of what-ifs. The house too quiet, her room untouched like a shrine. Little did I know, the clues I'd ignored were breadcrumbs, leading to a truth that would shatter me years later. The months after, Emily disappeared, turned into a gray fog I could barely navigate. I kept her room exactly as she'd left it, the sketchbook open on the desk, a half-finished drawing of a sunflower staring back at me every time I passed the door. The police file grew thicker with statements and dead ends, but thinner with hope. Friends stopped calling after a while. Grief makes people uncomfortable. I'd sit on the porch in the evenings, the old swing creaking under me, staring at the empty street as if she might come walking up at any minute. Backpack slung over her shoulder, apologizing for worrying me. Years passed. 5, then 10. I aged in quiet increments, gray hairs. I didn't bother dyeing, lines around my eyes that deepened with every unanswered question. I took early retirement from the school, lived on Tom's small pension and my savings, and spent more time than I care to admit driving to the city, walking neighborhoods she might have liked, showing her photo to strangers who shook their heads politely. I joined online groups for missing children, even though she wasn't a child anymore. I learned the language of loss, closure, cold case, persons of interest. None of it brought her back then. About a year ago, something shifted. A woman named Linda, an old neighbor who'd moved to the city, messaged me on Facebook. She'd seen Emily at a charity gala of all places. Linda sent a blurry photo taken from across the room, a woman in an elegant black gown, hair swept up, standing beside a tall, silver-haired man in a tuxedo. The face was older, thinner, but it was her. My Emily. Linda said the man was Richard Harrington, a wealthy real estate developer, and the woman had been introduced as his wife. Wife, the word hit me like a slap. I stared at that photo for hours, zooming in until the pixels blurred, searching for some sign she was unhappy, trapped. Anything that would explain why she'd never reached out. I wrote letters, dozens of them, to the address Linda found. A post office box registered to one of Harrington's companies. No reply. I called the few numbers I could dig up. Assistants answered, polite but firm, saying Mrs. Harrington was unavailable. I even drove to the city twice, parked outside the gated estate on the hill, watching the lights come on in the windows at dusk. I never saw her. I told myself I wouldn't force my way in, that if she'd chosen this life, I had to respect it. But the not knowing ate at me like rust. The real discovery came slowly, pieced together from whispers and public records. Richard Harrington was 48 when he married Emily, 28, years older than her. They'd wed quietly in Vegas. 6 months after she disappeared from Willow Creek, I found the marriage certificate online one sleepless night. My hands shaking so badly I could barely scroll. There were society page photos over the years, Emily on his arm at fundraisers, smiling that practiced smile I didn't recognize. She looked beautiful, expensive, untouchable, but her eyes were always slightly averted from the camera, if she couldn't quite meet the lens. I hired a private investigator with the last of my savings. Mark was a retired detective, kind-eyed but straightforward. He took the case for half his usual rate, said he had a daughter about Emily's age. Over coffee in a diner that smelled of burnt toast and bacon grease, he laid out what he'd found. Richard Harrington had a reputation charming in public, controlling in private. Previous girlfriends had taken out restraining orders that quietly disappeared. His late first wife had died in a boating accident. Rumors swirled, but nothing ever stuck. And Emily. She had no bank account in her name, no credit cards, no driver's license renewal since the marriage. Her signature appeared on nothing. Mark's contact at the DMV said her old license had expired years ago. She was, for all legal purposes, a ghost living inside a palace. The final piece came the day I drove out there unannounced. Mark had warned me not to, but I couldn't wait anymore. It was early December, the air crisp, the sky a pale washed-out blue. I parked down the street, walked up the long driveway lined with bare maple trees, their branches skeletal against the clouds. The gate was open for a delivery truck, and I slipped through before I could talk myself out of it. The front door was unlocked. Someone had just carried in boxes of Christmas decorations. I stepped inside, the hush of wealth enveloping me like cool silk. That's when I saw her. She was on her knees in the foyer, scrubbing at a faint scuff mark near the grand staircase. A bucket of soapy water sat beside her, the sharp tang of cleaner cutting through the scent of pine from a towering Christmas tree in the corner. She wore gray sweatpants and an oversized sweater, sleeves pushed up, hair twisted back with a plain elastic. No jewelry except a thin gold wedding band. When she heard my footsteps, she looked up and the rag slipped from her fingers. "Mom," the word came out cracked, disbelieving. She scrambled to her feet, water dripping from her hands onto the marble. Her face was bare of makeup, cheeks flushed from exertion, eyes wide and frightened. I took a step toward her, my throat closing. "Emily, baby, what is this? What are you doing?" She glanced up the curving staircase, voice dropping to a whisper. "You have to leave. Right now. If he finds you here, Emily Harrington." A woman's voice echoed from the hallway, crisp, impatient. A housekeeper in a neat uniform appeared, carrying an armful of linens. She stopped when she saw me, eyebrows lifting. Emily's hands fluttered, wiping themselves on her pants. "This is an old friend," she said quickly. She was just leaving, but I wasn't. Not this time. The housekeeper hesitated, then nodded and disappeared. Emily grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me into a side room. A formal sitting area with stiff brocade chairs and heavy drapes. She closed the door softly, leaning against it as if to hold the world out. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the way her collarbone stood out sharply beneath the sweater. She'd lost weight. "Too much, Mom, please," she whispered, tears welling. "You shouldn't have come." I reached for her hands. They were red and rough, nails trimmed short, cuticles cracked. "You're scrubbing floors in your own house, Emily, in a mansion. Why?" She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's not. It's complicated, then uncomplicated." My voice shook, but I kept it low. "I've spent 15 years imagining every terrible thing that could have happened to you. And now I find you here, married to a man old enough to be your father, cleaning like hired help. Talk to me." She sank into one of the chairs, shoulders curling inward. For a long moment, only the distant hum of the vacuum upstairs filled the silence. Then she spoke, voice barely above a breath. "I met Richard right after that fight we had. I was upset, driving around, and ended up at a coffee shop in the city. When he was there, noticed I was crying. Bought me a latte, listened. He was kind, Mom. Said all the things I needed to hear, that I was talented, special, that I deserved more than small-town life." She laughed bitterly, a sound like breaking glass. I was 19. I believed him. I sat across from her, afraid to move too quickly, afraid she'd bolt. He swept me off my feet. Fancy dinners, trips, promises. Said he'd pay for art school, set me up in a studio. A month later, he asked me to marry him. I thought it was a fairy tale. Her fingers twisted the hem of her sweater. "The wedding was small, quick. I didn't invite you because I was ashamed of how fast it happened. And part of me was angry still. I thought I'd call after the honeymoon, explain everything." But then she trailed off, eyes distant. "Then the rules started," I said quietly. She nodded. "Little things at first. He didn't like my old friends. Said they were holding me back. He wanted me home when he got back from work. Then he took over the finances, said it was easier, that I shouldn't worry about money. My phone was on his plan. He'd check the bill. My car was in his name. One day I realized I hadn't driven anywhere alone in months." Her voice cracked. "When I brought up art school again, he laughed. Said I didn't need it anymore, that being his wife was enough." I felt the anger rise, hot and steady, but I kept it leashed. This wasn't about my rage. It was about her survival, the cleaning. I prompted gently. "Punishment," she whispered. "Or control. Or both. If I displease him, if I speak out of turn at a dinner party. Or forget to thank him properly for some gift he takes away privileges. Credit cards, car keys, phone. Sometimes he makes me do the housework myself. Says it builds character. The staff knows not to help when he's decreed it." She looked at me then, eyes swimming. "I've tried to leave, Mom, 3 times. Each time he finds me, he has people watching, lawyers. Money fixes everything." My heart fractured in that moment, pieces scattering like ice on a winter pond. All those years I'd wondered if she was happy without me. If she'd chosen a better life and she'd been trapped in a gilded cage. Wings clipped. I reached out again, and this time she'd let me take her hands. They trembled in mine. "You're not staying here another day," I said, voice steady even as tears slid down my cheeks. "I'm getting you out." She shook her head, panic flashing. "You don't understand. He'll ruin you. He'll say I'm unstable, that you kidnapped me. He has judges, police chiefs. I don't care." I squeezed her fingers. "I lost you once because I didn't fight hard enough to understand what was happening. I'm not losing you again." For the first time in 15 years, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against mine. The way she did when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. I felt her breath warm and shaky against my skin. We stayed like that until footsteps sounded in the hall, heavy, deliberate. Richard was home. The door to the sitting room swung open with a decisive click, and there he stood, Richard Harrington, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair combed back, exuding the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. His eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked from Emily to me, lingering a fraction too long. The air in the room thickened, the faint scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something sharper cloying in the confined space. Emily straightened, her hand slipping from mine, her face composing into a mask of polite neutrality I'd seen in those society photos. "Darling," he said smoothly. Stepping inside, I didn't know we had a guest. His voice was cultured, warm on the surface, but there was an undercurrent, like a river hiding jagged rocks. He extended a hand to me, manicured nails catching the light from the window. "Richard Harrington. And you are?" I stood slowly, ignoring his hand, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Clara Thompson, Emily's mother." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "Ah, the elusive mother-in-law. Emily's mentioned you." He turned to her, a subtle shift in his posture that made her shrink back slightly. "Why didn't you tell me she was visiting? We could have prepared properly." Emily's lips parted, but no words came. I stepped forward, placing myself between them. "This isn't a social call, Mr. Harrington. I've just learned some disturbing things about how my daughter lives in this house." He chuckled, a low, patronizing sound, folding his arms. "Disturbing? Clara May, I call you Clara. Emily has everything she could want. A beautiful home, security, a life of comfort." He gestured vaguely at the room's opulent furnishings, the velvet curtains pooling on the floor like spilled wine. "Comfort," I echoed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "She's scrubbing your floors like a servant. That's not comfort. That's control." Emily whispered, "Mom, please." Richard's expression hardened, the charm cracking. Emily understands the value of discipline. In a marriage, there are expectations. She's chosen this life. He moved closer to her, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, but I saw the subtle tension in her jaw. "Chosen," I said, anger simmering now. She was 19, vulnerable. You isolated her, cut her off from her world. That's not choice. That's manipulation. He released her shoulder, turning fully to me, his height imposing. "I think it's time for you to leave, Clara, before you say something you'll regret." I didn't move. In that moment, fragments of plans I'd half formed on the drive here crystallized. I couldn't just walk out and leave her. Not again. "Emily," I said softly, keeping my eyes on him. "Do you want to stay here?" She hesitated, glancing between us, her fingers twisting together. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. Finally, she whispered, "No." Richard's face darkened. "Emily," but I was already moving. I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. "We're leaving now." He blocked our path, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You can't just take her. She's my wife. There are laws." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Laws, like the ones you've bent to keep her here. I've spoken to a lawyer. Isolation, financial control, it's abuse. And I have proof." Was a bluff mostly? Mark the Pie had gathered enough to start. but nothing ironclad yet. Still, it gave him pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. Emily squeezed my hand, finding her voice. "Richard, I want a divorce. I'm done." He laughed, but it was forced. "You think it's that simple? Everything you have is because of me. You'll be nothing without me." She lifted her chin, a spark of the old Emily igniting. "I'd rather be nothing than this." We pushed past him then, his hand grazing her arm in a last attempt to hold on. In the foyer, I grabbed her coat from the rack, draping it over her shoulders. The front door loomed like freedom. As we stepped outside, the cold air hit us, sharp and invigorating, carrying the scent of impending snow. Richard followed to the threshold, his voice booming. "You'll regret this, both of you. I have friends in high places." I turned back, my words measured. "And I have a daughter who's suffered enough. Try to stop us, and you'll see what a mother's fight looks like." We hurried down the driveway, my car waiting like a lifeline. Emily slid into the passenger seat, buckling with shaking hands. As I drove through the gates, she let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. I reached over, rubbing her back in small circles, the way I did when she was a child with a scraped knee. "It's okay," I murmured. "You're safe now." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't over. Richard wouldn't let go easily. That night, in a motel room 2 hours away, the walls thin, the comforter smelling faintly of bleach, I sat up planning. Emily slept fitfully beside me, her breathing uneven. I called Mark first, whispering into the phone. "We need evidence. Bank records, witness statements, anything to prove coercion." He was calm, professional. "I've got leads. Ex-employees who've seen things. Give me a week." Next, I contacted a women's shelter hotline, their voice kind and reassuring over the line. They connected me to a lawyer specializing in domestic abuse who agreed to meet us the next day. "Document everything," she advised. Photos of her hands, any bruises, her story in writing. Emily woke as I hung up, her eyes puffy. "What if he finds us?" I smoothed her hair. "He won't. We're smarter than that. Change of clothes tomorrow, pay with cash, no phones he can track." We spent the next days in motion, driving back roads, staying in Altuve places. Emily opened up more, sharing details. The verbal barbs that cut deeper than knives. The isolation disguised as protection. "He made me doubt myself," she said one evening over dinner coffee, the cup warming her chapped hands. "Convinced me I couldn't survive without him." "You can," I assured her. "You will." I pawned my wedding ring for extra cash. Tom would understand, Anne. We rented a small apartment under a false name in a neighboring state. Mark delivered emails from Richard's former assistant detailing patterns of control. Financial docs showing Emily's assets funneled into his accounts. The lawyer filed for divorce and a restraining order. Citing emotional and financial abuse, Richard fought back. Of course, his attorneys sending threatening letters claiming Emily was mentally unstable. But we were prepared. In court, Emily testified, her voice steady, recounting years of subtle imprisonment. I sat in the gallery, pride swelling as she reclaimed her story. It wasn't revenge, not the dramatic kind. It was justice, methodical and quiet. We didn't destroy him. We freed her. And in doing so, I found a strength I didn't know I had left. As the dust settled, the consequences rippled out. Word spread in Richard's circles, whispers at galas, sidelong glances at board meetings. His reputation, that polished veneer, began to crack. A business partner pulled out of a deal, citing personal concerns. The society pages that once fawned over him now ran subtle pieces on his divorce, painting him as the jilted husband, but the undertone was damning. Former employees came forward, emboldened by Emily's courage, sharing stories of intimidation and favoritism. A local paper picked it up, the headline restrained but pointed. "Prominent developer faces allegations in messy split." His staff, the housekeeper who'd seen us that day. The driver who'd witnessed arguments testified quietly in depositions. Not out of spite, but truth. He treated her like property, one said, her voice firm over the lawyer's recorder. The community, that insulated world of wealth, turned subtly against him. Invitations dried up. Golf buddies canceled tea times. It wasn't a public shaming. No scandal splashed. Cross tabloids, but a quiet erosion of influence. Emily's friends from college, the ones she'd lost touch with, reached out after seeing a social media post from me. We always wondered, one said over a video call, her face pixelated but sincere. They formed a support network, sending care packages, offering jobs. The family distant cousins I'd barely spoken to in years rallied too, sharing meals and stories that reminded Emily of her roots. In Willow Creek, where I'd returned briefly to pack up the old house, neighbors stopped me on the street. "We heard about Emily," Mrs. Harlan said, her hand on my arm, warm and steady. "You're both so brave." It wasn't pity. It was respect. The town, small as it was, felt like a safety net again. Richard faced no criminal charges abuse, like his slithered through legal loopholes, but the civil suit hit hard. The judge awarded Emily half the marital assets, including proceeds from the mansion sale. He appealed, of course, but lost. Watching him in court that final day, his suit still impeccable, but his eyes hollow, I felt no triumph, only closure. He'd built his empire in control. Losing it was his truest punishment. Through it all, I kept my dignity. No angry calls, no vengeful schemes. Justice came from truth, spoken plainly. And in the end, it was enough. With the divorce finalized, Emily and I returned to Willow Creek, not to the old house, which I'd sold to cover legal fees, but to a small rental cottage on the edge of town. It was modest, with creaky wooden floors and a kitchen that smelled of fresh paint when we moved in, but it felt like a sanctuary. The first night, we unpacked boxes under the warm glow of a single lamp, the sound of crickets drifting through the open window. Emily paused while hanging a framed photo, our last one together, taken at the lake before everything shattered. "I can't believe we're here," she said softly, her fingers tracing the glass. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. "We're home," I whispered. Rebuilding wasn't easy. Scars like hers don't fade overnight. Emily woke from nightmares sometimes, gasping, her sheets tangled as if she'd been running in her sleep. I'd sit with her then, brewing chamomile tea in the dim kitchen light, the steam curling up like fragile hope. We'd talk or not until the dawn light filtered through the curtains, painting the walls in soft pinks. She started therapy recommended by the lawyer. Sessions in a quiet office downtown where she'd emerge with red-rimmed eyes but a straighter posture. "It's like peeling back layers," she told me once. Over breakfast, oatmeal dotted with blueberries we'd picked from the backyard bush. I nodded, stirring my spoon slowly, remembering my own grief after Tom. Healing is messy, like mending a quilt with mismatched threads. But it holds. I encouraged her to rediscover her art. One afternoon, I cleared space in the living room, pushing the couch aside with a grunt, the floorboards protesting. I bought sketch pads and charcoals from the local supply store. The clerk smiled, genuine, as she wrapped them. Emily hesitated at first, her hand hovering over the blank page, but then the lines flowed, tentative strokes, turning bold. She drew the cottage garden, the wildflowers bending in the breeze, their petals smudged with gray shadows. "It's not perfect," she'd say, tilting her head critically. I'd lean over her shoulder, the faint graphite scent rising. "It's you," I'd reply. And it was raw, resilient. Work helped too. Emily found a job at the community center, teaching art classes to kids. I'd drop her off some mornings, watching from the car as she greeted them, her voice gaining strength with each good morning. The children adored her, their small hands messy with paint, laughter echoing down the halls. One evening, she came home with a drawing from a student to stick figure family under a rainbow. "They remind me of what I lost," she said, pinning it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, "and what I can still have." I saw the spark return to her eyes, dim at first, then brighter, like embers fanned to flame. For me, the healing came in quieter ways. I volunteered at the library, sorting books, the musty pages a comfort. Old friends reconnected, dinners at their homes, where we'd share stories over potluck casseroles, the clink of forks punctuating laughter. I forgave myself slowly for the years I'd blamed my blindness to the signs. You did what you could with what you knew. Emily said one night as we walked the neighborhood, leaves crunching underfoot, the air crisp with fall. I squeezed her arm, feeling the warmth through her sweater. And now we know better. We built new routines, anchors in the uncertainty. Sunday brunches at the diner where we'd order pancakes stacked high, syrup dripping sweetly. Evenings on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets as the stars emerged, sharing dreams she'd buried. I want to go back to school, she confessed one twilight, the sky streaked orange. Finish what I started. I smiled, pride swelling. Then do it. I'll be right here. Money from the settlement helped enough for stability, not luxury. We invested wisely, with advice from a financial planner, the meetings in a stuffy office smelling of coffee and ink. Emily opened her own account, the first deposit a small act of independence. It feels strange, she admitted, folding the receipt neatly. Good strange. There were setbacks. A letter from Richard's lawyer arrived one day, contesting a minor asset, his signature bold and unyielding. Emily's hands shook as she read it, but she set her jaw. No more, she said, crumpling it. We fought it together, the court ruling in our favor. It was the last echo of him. After that, silence. As months turned to a year, Emily bloomed. She enrolled in online courses, her laptop glowing late into the night, fingers flying over keys. She dated tentatively a kind man from her class. Their first outing was a picnic by the river, where she texted me a photo of wildflowers. Taking it slow, she said later, her cheeks flushed. I nodded, trusting her judgment. Forgiveness came gradually. Not for Richard, he didn't deserve it, but for ourselves. One rainy afternoon we sat by the window, drops pattering like gentle applause. I forgive you for not seeing, Emily said quietly, and I hope you forgive me for leaving. Tears mingled with the steam from our mugs. Always, I replied. Life settled into a rhythm of peace. Not perfect, but ours. The cottage filled with her paintings, colors vibrant against the walls. Friends visited the house, alive with voices. I planted a garden in spring, soil cool under my fingers, seeds promising growth. Emily joined me, kneeling in the dirt, her laughter free. Looking back, the pain shaped us, but didn't define us. We emerged stronger, woven together by threads of resilience. Emily taught me hope. I taught her endurance. And in that quiet cottage we found not just survival, but joy. The years have softened the edges of what happened, the way gentle waves smooth sharp stones on a riverbank. Emily is 38 now, with laugh lines that crinkle when she smiles. Real smiles, the kind that reach her eyes and light up a room. She finished her degree, opened a small art studio downtown where sunlight pours through tall windows onto easels and scattered tubes of paint. Children and adults come for classes, their voices mingling with the soft scratch of brushes on canvas. She met Daniel, their quiet man who teaches pottery, his hands steady and kind. They married last spring in our backyard garden under strings of fairy lights that twinkled like captured stars. I walked her down the aisle of folding chairs, her hand warm in mine, and when she said I do, I felt the last piece of my broken heart click into place. I still live in the cottage, though it's fuller now. Grandchildren visit on weekends, two little ones with Emily's blue eyes and boundless energy. They chase fireflies in the grass while I watch from the porch, a quilt over my knees, even in summer. The scent of honeysuckle drifts on the evening air. And sometimes I catch myself thinking of Tom, how he'd have loved this noise, this life spilling over. Emily brings dinner, often homemade lasagna or soup, simmering with herbs from the garden we tend together. We ate at the old oak table I refinished, talking about everything and nothing. Her latest exhibition, the kids' school plays. The way the light hits the lake at dusk, I never heard from Richard again after the settlement. Word reached us through old acquaintances that he sold the mansion, moved abroad somewhere quiet. I don't wish him ill. I simply don't think of him anymore. The space he occupied in our lives has been filled with better things, love that doesn't demand, trust that doesn't control. Some nights, when the house is still and the moon spills silver across the floorboards, I sit with a cup of tea and look at the photos lining the mantel. There's one of Emily at 19, paint-smudged and grinning. Next to it, one from her wedding day, radiant in a simple lace dress. And between them, a new one, the 4 generations me holding my youngest grandchild. Emily's arm around my shoulders, Daniel capturing the moment. We are proof that broken things can mend. That time and truth and stubborn love can weave something stronger than what was lost. The lesson I carry now isn't bitter. It's this: we must listen closely to the people we love, even when their words are silent. We must notice the small shifts, the averted eyes, the forced smiles, the hands that trembled just slightly. And when we see pain, we must act gently but firmly. Because waiting for perfect certainty can cost years. But more than that, I've learned that no cage is unbreakable. Not money, not fear, not shame. There is always a way out if someone reaches for you if you're willing to take their hand, Emily. And I talk about it sometimes, not often, but when we do, it's without heaviness. I was so scared I'd forgotten who I was, she said once, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. But you remembered for both of us until I could again. I just squeezed her fingers and said nothing. Because some truths don't need words. Life isn't the fairy tale. I once imagined for my daughter no sprawling mansion filled with ease. But it's real, and it's ours. And on quiet evenings when the grandchildren are asleep on the couch, their small breaths steady, Emily and I sit together on the swing, the chains creaking softly. We don't need to fill the silence. It's enough to be here, side by side, whole. If you've stayed with me through this long story, I wonder, have you ever had to fight for someone you love when they couldn't fight for themselves? Or maybe you've been the one needing rescue, waiting for a hand to pull you from the dark. What did it teach you about strength, about forgiveness, about the quiet power of simply showing up? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you to hold your loved ones a little closer, consider subscribing. There are more stories, here real ones, hard ones, healing ones. Because as long as we keep sharing them, none of us has to walk alone. Thank you for listening.